a 42-year-old Natavesicube mech from Chase, BC lives in the heart of the shoe swap. He's been hanging out fishing his whole life. He's been a logger for 22 years. And he's had two encounters with these damn things, and once in 2015, near Suspense Bridge, where he was logging. He was running a harvester, which is a big machine, you sit in it, and it actually cuts the trees down and limbs them while you sit there and operate it. So his machine had been breaking down previously, and the contractor was trying to get a new alternator for it from fitting cam loops, and told him not to come in. And then he was about to leave, I guess, to go back home, and he said, "Nope, come on back in. Your machine's fixed." So he came in while he was working the night shift, and his night shift was typically late afternoon until like 2 or 3 in the morning. I guess you noticed that certain times of the day it gets hot out. Too hot to log. The daytime is a little safer. At night, you can see fires and stuff easier. And that's what they do. So he's in the middle of a logging block. That there on all the trees are felled, they're on the ground. There are no trees directly near him, which he mentioned in the story. No trees or limbs could have fallen onto his machine to make the noise that he heard. That kind of semi-woke him from his sleep. Because what happened was that he went to work. He's all by himself. He said there the past, he'd felt uneasy in this particular place again. This is in Spencer's Bridge, BC. The thing is, he said that every time when he was outside his machine, he felt very uneasy, like something is watching him. But he just didn't feel too cool. I think his truck was a couple kilometers away from him. His pickup truck more. So anyway, he's in his machine, and it's late at night. He figured about 1 o'clock in the morning, and he's noticing the hydraulics are screwing up. And his machine is losing power, obviously. He's breaking down, so he shut it down, and it was like suicide on where he was situated. And he's left his flashlight in his pickup truck, which is a few kilometers away. And he said he was not about to try to walk the pitch black across all those felled trees. Obviously, that's freaking suicide. You're not going to get killed, but you're probably going to snap a leg, a shin, or an ankle for sure, or your wrists falling down in that. So he had no choice but to stay in his machine, try to sleep, and wait for the next crew to come in, and then catch a ride with them. So here's where the nightmare starts. So he's broken down his machine. Hydraulics and electricity are starting to falter, shuts it down. Again, because he wasn't going to hike out without a flashlight across all the distance. He fell asleep in the cab of his machine. And I think he said it was around 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning. Somewhere around there, very late. He felt and heard the unmistakable sound of something stepping up on the side of his machine. So we said it sounded like when you step up on the hood of a car and it dents in right with your foot. And he said the sound was similar to his own sound in his full-grown man's body. Stepping up on that sound got a lot louder and a lot heavier. And he said he instantly something was on the machine. So anyway, this sound and jolt of his machine went down. And he wasn't quite asleep yet, which actually made him freeze up and quote, he said his blood ran cold, and he felt absolutely uneasy. And he was basically crapping himself as he reached for the dash and pulled the lights and lit the place up. And he said this 8-foot-tall black hair-covered upright thing jumped off of his machine and went ripping across the fallen tree in the logging block until it disappeared in the timber. Now how bad would that be? Think about it. You're stuck in your stupid machine in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing you can do about it, and all of a sudden here's this thing standing on top of your machine, peering in at you through the glass, probably from what would be 4 feet away. And that would really, really suck. So that was an intriguing story. And then, I guess he said the rest of the next few hours were some of the longest hours of his entire life. Because he had to sit there and wait for the extra crew to come in. And as well, he's sitting there not certain what's going to happen. Is this thing is going to come back out? He wasn't certain if it had just come up, to look into the machine, not knowing if he was in it or not. And obviously had to go through many hours of extreme anxiety, which any one of us would, because that would absolutely suck. But coincidentally, just over the hill from where he was taking a straight shot west to the highway that goes from Lillywhite to Lytton, a girl lives. She grew up in Lillywhite, near Lytton, in a house on the Fraser River side of that highway. She took me there just a couple of weeks ago to show me where she and her girlfriend saw one of these things in the backyard. And what she said was that they were sneaking a cigarette outside their bedroom window. So both of them were hanging out the window somewhat at dusk, where they looked across the backyard into the back forest and saw this great big huge massive brown thing that was standing leaning against a tree. They were basically looking back at them. They noticed that as they were staring at it, it sort of started swinging back and forth from side to side on its feet. So they went racing in the house to go tell their dad. I was going, obviously. And we went up there to look around. And there was a big footprint all around the base of that tree. I will not put my name in this email, because I do not care about the attention or the idiots out there who will laugh at this or laugh it off. But I want the story out there to ease the minds of all the others who have had a similar encounter. Let me set the scene for you. For me, without a doubt, I was in the process of getting my honorable discharge and getting back to civilian life when I decided to go on a hike and use the wilderness to get back to my roots. And growing up hunting, fishing, camping, and just exploring the woods and water, like I did with my grandfather and father growing up. The place I decided to hike was a place I'd been visiting for years, on family vacations in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. But this time I was spending 5 days and 4 nights in the woods by myself with nobody around. To just think about my future, I was hiking approximately 80 miles, which would take me up and around Mount Contel. I'd heard a lot about this trail section and wanted to give it a try myself. The first 4 days and 3 nights were pretty uneventful outside of seeing a mama black bear with the 2 cubs, which is pretty cool. The last night there, my life beliefs and respect for the unknown changed. I was staying in an old settler's cabin that I'd heard about from a local mountain expert who had hiked these mountains for 30 years and knew them like the back of his hand. The cabin was tiny and falling apart, but it was still pretty cool to see where these settlers stayed way back when. It was about 6 p.m. when I got to the cabin. As the sun was starting to go down and the temperature was dropping quickly, I got to the cabin, laid out my sleeping bag and pillows, started a fire to cook some dinner, and sat down to enjoy the peaceful mountain evening. I guess it was about 9 p.m. when I headed to the cabin to lay down, read a little from my book, and get some rest as sunrise would come early the next day, which is my alarm clock when I'm out in the woods. After about a half hour of reading my book, I heard a loud and painful crying noise coming from the woods outside the cabin. I thought to myself, what the hell was that? I got up, grabbed my flashlight and my Ruger 350 7 Magnum revolver, which I always carry in the woods, and walked to the door to see what it was. After standing there for a minute or so, I heard a large howl coming from the north of the cabin. I've heard coyotes howl, but this is different. The most terrifying, bone-chilling, soul-shaking growl I have ever heard came from about 30 yards away, and it scared the hell out of me. I've heard many bears growl, from grizzlies in Wyoming to black bears in Tennessee, and this is nothing like that. I took the safety off the revolver and aimed in the general direction with a flashlight, doing the same. I was shaking like a dog. I've heard this one before. I was shaking like a dog shitting razor blades. That's shaking. I've been in war and looked evil in the eyes and not flinched while doing it. But I was terrified of what I just heard. I'm shaking right now, typing this and thinking about that moment. Then this massive creature emerged from behind a group of trees, walking east to west, carrying a dead deer over his left shoulder, As my light hit the sink, it dropped the deer. He turned right at me and stared. I've never seen anything in my life that had this kind of combination of height, weight, overall size, and power. This thing stood 8 to 9 feet tall, was probably 4 to 5 feet wide at the shoulders, looked like it weighed anywhere from 5 to 700 pounds, and was standing upright like a human. My first instinct was to shoot first, but I couldn't pull the trigger. And I think it's because it looked so human-like, but it wasn't human, and it still couldn't shoot. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but in reality was probably only 10 seconds. Then this thing jumped back behind the trees and hid. I lowered my gun, though it kept the flashlight on the group of trees. Whatever this was, it didn't seem to want to hurt me because, as soon as I lowered my gun, it stuck its head out, seeming to be just as curious about me as I was about him. I put the gun in my waistband and raised my right hand to show that I had nothing but the flashlight in my hands now. And then it walked back out of the trees and did the same thing I was doing. I lowered my hand and so did it. I raised my hand back up and I did the same thing. I all of a sudden felt a calmness come over me during this interaction with it, and it was not, and I was not scared anymore. This went on for about a minute or so. Then this thing took off with the speed and agility of something that size couldn't have. It took 3 or 4 steps and went down the mountain around the corner with such ease that it was amazing to watch. After this thing left, I got a very high anxiety feeling that I've never had before, trying to figure out what the hell. I just saw that night was sleepless, and the revolver never left my hand that night after that thing left. And when the sun came up, I packed up all my things and headed out of the cabin to see that dead deer was gone. Did that thing come back for it when it knew I wasn't watching anymore? How did it know I wouldn't be waiting? I finished the remaining 8 miles of my hike with anxiety and fear of seeing that thing again. But I didn't. The encounter changed my life and the way I listened to the sounds of the wilderness. Now I still go on hikes around the country, but I do so with a very different appreciation for the woods and what lives in them. Thanks for listening to these true stories of cryptic encounters.